The great war correspondent, John Pilger, produced an outstanding 2010 documentary on the origins of wartime propaganda called The War You Don't See: Why Propaganda Hides the True Face of War. The documentary is linked below and covers the evolution of American government propaganda from the Wilson administration in World War I to the wars on Iraq. Propaganda was key to draw the United States into World War I, World War II, and maintaining support for the Korean War.
The symbols and the leaders change, but Germany's maniacal urge to impose its will on others continues from generation to generation.
When the U.S. military studied why it failed in Vietnam, it blamed the press for telling the truth. The American war machine created myths that the Vietnam War was lost because of bombing restrictions, funding cuts, liberals, and a hostile media that reported negative news. Generals developed a plan to limit the number of reporters and deny access to anyone known to report negative news. When the wars against Iraq began, reporters were embedded and assigned an escort to ensure soldiers did not speak freely. This worked well until the internet became widespread. Anyone with a cheap video camera could become a reporter, to include many former professional reporters who were forced from their jobs for refusing to censor news or promote propaganda. German reporter Udo Ulfkotte is one example, who made this statement in 2014.
Well, I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. But seeing right now, within the last months, how far how the German and American media tries to bring war to the people in Europe, to bring war to Russia, this is a point of no return. And I'm going to stand up and say it is not right what I have done in the past, to manipulate people, to make propaganda against Russia, and it is not right what my colleagues do and have done in the past, because they are bribed to betray the people, not only in Germany, all over Europe. The reason writing this book was that I am very fearful of a new war in Europe, and I don't like to have this situation again, because war is never coming from itself. There is always people behind it to push for war. And this is not only politicians, this is journalists too.
Americans hear about a new information war strategy, formerly known as wartime propaganda. Most don't realize that it is a disinformation war, and they are the target. The U.S. military has formed huge propaganda units, with each service training thousands of military personnel and paying contractors to influence social media. They post information online and make comments as regular anonymous folks who support the official government narrative. They demean truth-tellers and pressure websites to censor comments. Americans would not approve, so this activity is spun as just providing information, as shown in this recent U.S. Navy recruiting video.
This is the new frontier. Like, this is the new warfare.
It's constantly expanding. As our enemies or anybody who wants to do us harm is growing their capabilities, we're growing our capabilities to defend ourselves.
The people we're informing, we're actually helping them make decisions that affect the world. We provide intelligence that can save people's lives.
Soon after the 2014 American coup in Ukraine, NATO began its information warfare effort. Its website states, quote, "At present, interest in information warfare has significantly increased in connection with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. Russia has been influencing the Ukrainians and international community in order to promote its own version of events." End quote. This NATO effort was needed because the Russian version of events was based on the truth. A huge organization called the Ukrainian PR Army appeared that writes stories for the Western media and sets up interviews with their experts. See the recent story linked below from Redacted. Most Americans assume they are well informed and cannot be fooled by propaganda, but they are wrong. For example, the truth about the current conflict with Russia can only be found at obscure internet sites, which our info warriors do their best to demean and destroy. Here is a video clip from 2022, a famous American professor, Dr. John Mearsheimer, that stuns most Americans.
When you think about the war in the Ukraine, it's really the U.S. and the Russians that matter the most, in addition to the Ukrainians, of course. Now, the conventional wisdom in the West is that what is happening here is that Putin is an imperialist and he is bent on creating a greater Russia or recreating the Soviet Union. And what he is intent on doing in Ukraine is conquering that country, occupying that country, and integrating it into a greater Russia. And in fact, Ukraine is the first stop on the train line. When he's done with Ukraine, he's going to move on to other states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, maybe Poland, who knows. But he is an imperialist at heart. He's an aggressor who's interested in building an empire. This is the conventional wisdom that you all know well. I would imagine that most of you believe this. My view is this is simply wrong. There's no evidence to support it. I believe that if you're going to make that argument, you have to show evidence that Putin said it was desirable to conquer Ukraine and create a greater Russia. You have to show evidence that he thought it was feasible to do that. And you have to show evidence that he said that that's what he was doing. There is no evidence, and I want to underline that word, no. There is no evidence that he thought it was desirable to conquer Ukraine or to create a greater Russia or to conquer any other country. There's no evidence that he thought it was feasible. And there's no evidence that he said that's what he was doing. Furthermore, he does not have the capability to do it. The Russians invaded Ukraine with 190,000 men. There's no way 190,000 men could conquer a piece of real estate with 40 plus million people in it with 190,000 men. When the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, they went in with 1.5 million men. You need a huge army to conquer a country like Ukraine, occupy it, and incorporate it into your country. And you're not going to do that with 190,000 men.
This truth upsets most Americans, who may insist that Dr. Mearsheimer was just offering an opinion or maybe a Putin puppet. They've seen and read hundreds of hours of major media that told them otherwise. Most Americans don't understand that the corporate media does not exist to inform them, but to mislead them. The fake information generated by these news organizations is so bad that the world's greatest journalist, Julian Assange, said the world would be better off without them.
Basically, populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment. But our number one enemy is ignorance. And I believe that is the number one enemy of everyone, is not understanding what is actually going on in the world. It's only when you start to understand that you can make effective decisions and effective plans. Now, the question is, who is promoting ignorance? Well, those organizations that try to keep things secret, and those organizations which distort true information to make it false, misrepresentative. In this latter category, it is bad media. It really is my opinion that the media in general are so bad, we have to question whether the world wouldn't be better off without them altogether.